Let's play 40k emergency services and rescue an Imperial Knight from eBay in an hour. I've had a couple of Imperial Knights for a while now for my AdMech force, the Wayward Forge. They were inspired by the game Metro Exodus, alongside many other sci-fi and post-apocalyptic themes. The main inspiration was the mission area The Volga, a swampy, bleak area with lots of derelict buildings and hidden bunkers. Perfect for a 40k setting too. I decided to keep that in mind and blend the aesthetic choices of the two settings together. This meant that my AdMech all wore the robes of rangers, and I focused quite heavily on machines that could traverse tough terrain and swamp, which ruled out tracked vehicles. I leaned heavily into Iron Striders and Dune Crawlers, alongside one or two floaty tanks. But the biggest and best addition had to be when I finally repainted an old Imperial Knight that I bought on eBay literally years ago. It was a blast. I got to practice loads of weathering techniques and battle damage, and I hadn't even needed to paint the boring parts. This also lent into the slightly sinister narrative that I was developing for the Wayward Forge, in that they aim to acquire all knowledge for the good of the Imperium, even if that initially hurts the Imperium, and they will use any technology they can get their hands on. This includes, in this instance, Imperial Knights that may have belonged to other houses beforehand. Quickly painted over and barely observant of the rituals, these knights are consummate killers, partially due to the Wayward Forge bonded pilot, but mainly due to the bitterness and fury of the machine spirit that's been ripped from its bondsman and house. So a cool law reason to nick other people's minis and paint right over them. No stripping required. The real life benefits to this is that it's cheap, comparatively. It recycles old models, so that's good. It's quick, no building, and the priming's been done. And in my opinion, the results are great. The previous paint job often gives a really nice textured undercoat. If there are nice details that I like, such as these hazard stripes on this knight errant, I'll leave it in. I'm also partial to this because it preserves the paint job a little. Someone put time and love into this, and it's quite a nice feeling to let some of that continue to live on. All that reasoning aside, let's look at our rescue project for today. It has a nice red base coat and some cool hazard stripes here and there. They're a little wobbly, but we can use this. It also has this cute little skull. I'm going to paint over it, but I thought I'd film it for posterity. Before starting, make sure that you stare off into space for a bit because you had your booster vaccine yesterday and you feel absolutely honking. Okay, so we need to start painting. Let's get the timer going. Starting with Xandri dust and some large rip sponge, I'll sponge the new base layer all over the armour panels. I don't worry about getting a consistent coat or if I hit the trim. We'll fix any mistakes up later, and inconsistency on a big damaged machine isn't a bad thing. In true GW fashion, my poor Xandri dust gave up the ghost and had dried. Seriously, this is a theme lately. Am I doing something wrong? Luckily, some trusty Steel Legion drab was on hand to save the day. The colour is darker than Xandri dust, but again, the change in hue isn't a bad thing at all for this project. I sponged this liberally everywhere. I did make sure to leave some of the hazard stripes visible. Next up was the trim. I took a large brush and threw Screaming Bell all over the armour trim. If any got onto the armour panels, that was fine. It all starts to look like weathering eventually. Once this was done, I went back in and added some cool stripe effects with Thunderhawk Blue. I then took the old sponge and made a quick chipping effect with Steel Legion Drab. Once this was done, I took some contrast Black Templar and slapped this on some of the big cables. I also added some Stegadon Scale Green, one of the best colours ever, to the missiles. When the contrast had dried, I drowned the entire model in Agrax Earthshade. Yeah, you heard. Drowned. Then it was time to let the shade dry. My hour time limit won't include drying times because we can go and do other things, live our lives. This hour time limit is purely brush to mini time. After all, we all have fun things to do elsewhere. When the shade's finally dry, it's time to throw on some basing material in the form of some cork and a Grellan earth. Once that was down, I chucked on some verdigris using some Nylac oxide all over the trim. I followed this up with some riser rust straight from the pots all over the skeletal frame, or, where it needed it. I also added some rapid heat bloom to the Avenger Gatling cannon and the thermal vents, working up from Seraphim Sepia to Drakenhof Nightshade, exactly like the Lightning Strike Fighter video. For extra credit, I quickly mixed up some yellow ochre oil paint into a wash and applied this around the feet for a dusty effect and some further variation. I also used the sponge and some Stormhost silver to create some further metallic chipping. Then it was time to wait for it to dry again. Once it had dried, I chucked some Agrax Earthshade all over the base. I then tidied up the base rim with Steel Legion Drab. Then more waiting, off to enjoy the world. After that, I dry brushed some highlights onto the base and added some dead leaves and tufts. I also decided at the last minute to add some chain to the banner and waist as they were looking a little bare. With barely 30 seconds to go, I spritched the chain with some varnish and threw some agrax over the top. Then I ran out of time and put the brush and paints down. Then, off camera, I spent 10 seconds throwing some of the oil paint I had in the pot on the chain too. Sorry, I know that's cheating. I'll do penance later and drink the rest of the agrax or something. Anyway, 1 hour and 10 seconds, fine. Later, and I have another night ready to play. 400 odd points done in an hour. Always a good feeling. Give it a try yourselves. Adopt a night.